Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to be here with you all today. So, this is Conversations with Dr. Keena, and I am so excited to have Miss Keisha Berry here, my friend and colleague. And I would love, I'll hand it over to you in just a moment so you can introduce yourself. But I'm really excited today because we're going to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. We'll talk about homeschooling. And I am a homeschooling mom myself and also a speech language pathologist. And that's part of the reason that I'm so excited to have Miss Berry here. And I know she's got some wonderful gems to share with us today. So please, Keisha, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. So yes, we are colleagues and friends. We're moms that are also, homeschooling our children. I am a speech language pathologist. I've been practicing for about 15 years. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher. I started homeschooling 15 years ago. So the year I became a speech language pathologist was the year I decided to homeschool. And so now I actually have a private practice where we primarily serve homeschoolers who would have an IEP if they were either they previously had it or they would have an IEP if they enrolled in school, just because their needs present as so that they would need additional support if they were in a traditional school environment.
Wow. So I didn't realize that you started homeschooling at the same time that you started your speech language pathology career. That is very, very interesting. Okay, so I guess just to start, what led you to choose homeschooling? Was it your preparation in speech and language, or what made you decide to take that journey?
That's a great question. So I am definitely not one of those people that always dreamed of homeschooling my children. That was not on my radar. But when I was a special education teacher, my son was at my school. My son would be he would be considered what one calls twice exceptional. He did not have a formal diagnosis, but it was coming down the pipeline. And because I was a special educator, I recognized the signs. There were comments on his report card about things like he's inattentive and hyperactive. Well, because I know the language and that's the space I was in, I kind of knew that that was the direction that we were going. And also, he qualified to be considered a talented and gifted student. So he had both and going on. So he definitely had some additional needs that were related to his attention. And then he also had that little gifted piece where if he was uninterested at 6 years old, he was going to have a really hard time in the classroom. So at that time, I explored different options, different schools. Private school costs too much, or a school was too far, and so I decided that I was going to homeschool. It was supposed to be temporary,
Hmm.
but once we started, we never looked back.
Interesting. Oh wow. I understand. I never dreamed of homeschooling before. I actually wasn't even familiar with homeschooling until I was looking into private school options.
Hmm.
And I wasn't really seeing anything that checked all the boxes that I wanted.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I you also mentioned something. So I know you've been homeschooling for or 15 years,
Yes.
and I just want to give you an opportunity to brag on your successes because your oldest is in college. Is that right?
He is. He's a junior in college and he is now studying abroad. So he's in Greece. And, it's very interesting. I think that when you first begin homeschooling, there are little seeds of doubt that honestly, sometimes it can be planted by others, but we plant our own little seeds. And so you start to wonder if, what we're doing is going to work, if it is working. So I think that because he has graduated from homeschool, I homeschooled him from second grade all the way through college. I can see how those little things and little adjustments that I did when he was young, I can see how they have grown with him as a scholar. So, for example, when he was young, he was totally into Greek mythology. We still have all of his books on our bookshelf, 100% into it. So when he told me he was going to study abroad in Greece, it was kind of seeing those interests as a little boy come to fruition as an adult. And the fact that he set his heart out to kind of continue to explore his interests as a young adult. So, all of those little books that we used to buy him have now turned into, a real passion. So it's great to see his interests that he was allowed to embrace and really develop as a homeschooler. It's great to see those interests kind of flourish into what they become as adults. Also, one thing that was really great, with homeschooling was, I know that college is expensive, these days. And so we were really able to use our research skills that we learned as a
Mhm.
homeschooler to find scholarships. And so every single year we have pieced together, getting his tuition covered, or even he actually applied for all of the scholarships that he needed, with the exception of maybe like $2,000 to go study abroad in Greece. So, he put together the majority of that money. And so, I'm very impressed with his skills, and the way that he's actually applying them as a young adult.
Wow, that is amazing. That is so awesome. And I believe you answered another question that many people have in the back of their minds when they think about homeschooling is, will my child still have the same opportunities that
Mhm.
they would have if they graduated from traditional school? And I think we know absolutely homeschool students can attend college or go
Mhm.
into the workforce or attend trade schools, do apprenticeships. So
Yeah.
there, and it's possibly even easier to facilitate, like you talked about how you were able to lean into their interests at an earlier
Mhm.
age rather than being restricted by curriculum. So that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing. And I think we're now seeing homeschooling kind of maybe gain popularity.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you've noticed a shift in parents choosing to homeschool and um, or compared to when you first started, because I know you've been at this for a while. Do you feel like the that it's becoming more maybe on trend, and maybe the motivations or reasons have changed? What have you noticed in terms of homeschool culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, to be honest with you, I think that depending on the community that you're referring to, there's a community of homeschoolers where they feel called to homeschool. Like, this is something that they know they're going to do with their children from birth. Some families are even pre-planning, and they know that this is what their family is going to do. I still think that community exists. And then in other communities, there were always those groups of parents who felt like homeschool was a last resort, right? They had no choice. They had, they've explored all the options that they can, in their local public school, private school, maybe isn't an option, or like you mentioned earlier, doesn't check off all the boxes. And so homeschool honestly became a last resort. And so now that they're doing it, they see the fruits of their labor and they see how beneficial it is. And I also think, we talk a lot about the pandemic and the influence that it had, on parents, on families, and on students. I think that a lot of parents were exposed to what happens in school, exposed to curriculum, exposed to being able to see instruction. And some families just decided that that was not an option that they were going to continue. And then going back to school after the pandemic, there were several challenges that, teachers who were trying their best in the classroom, there were just several challenges that they were facing that were not necessarily their fault. But it doesn't seem like there was a viable solution. And so I think families started really considering that homeschooling was an option, at that point. So I don't necessarily know if it's become more popular just because, because homeschooling, to be honest with you, it's not the easiest thing. It's not the hardest thing you'll ever do. But
Right.
you don't choose homeschooling because you're like, oh, I want an easier way of being a parent, or easier way to educate my child. No, it's a big commitment. And so, I think people just really, like you mentioned, maybe never really hearing of homeschooling before. I think people really just it became more noticeable in their own communities, and they started to explore it for themselves.
Absolutely. And your point about homeschooling not being the easier choice, I'd like to expand on that or talk about that because I know that homeschooling can be an alternative to when you were maybe looking at private schools, but it's not easy, and it's not necessarily the least expensive option either,
Yeah.
because we know that often homeschoolers are not spending all their time at home. It's not
Yeah.
just sitting at the kitchen table. You're doing field trips,
Yeah.
you're maybe possibly doing co-ops or different things like that. And it does take a certain level of energy, like even with the different styles, people who may unschool their children,
Mhm.
that still requires
Mhm.
the parent to follow the child's lead and make resources available so that they are able to follow the child's interest
Yeah.
and make sure that they are still getting an education.
Mhm.
And so, with that said, I know there are a lot of people who may be interested, or some people who may be interested in homeschooling, but they may be curious about how to make it work because perhaps they maybe they're a single parents and they do have to work, or maybe it's a dual a household where both parents have to work. And traditionally, I think we think of homeschooling as one parent stays home and
Mhm.
focuses only exclusively on homeschooling while the other parent
Mhm.
is providing the financial resources.
Mhm.
And I know that we both are working homeschooling parents. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to share with parents who may be wondering, is it possible to be a homeschooling parent and work at the same time?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to scratch what you think homeschooling is. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people, when they imagine homeschool, like you mentioned, one parent is a breadwinner and one parent is staying home and homeschooling all of the kids. And that, while that is something that exists in the homeschool community, the the families are so much more diverse, and our family dynamics are so much more diverse now in 2025, especially in the area where we're located, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So, you know, I always tell families, do not attempt to homeschool by developing a homeschool plan and then making your work and life fit into it. You establish what your work and life looks like, and then you make homeschool fit into those slots, right? So even if you're a single parent and you have to work every day from 7 to 5, to be honest with you, the most challenging part is finding childcare. It's not the education part. Because in terms of homeschooling your child, homeschool does not have to happen during the daytime. And I was explaining to a group of parents yesterday, if I let my children start homeschool at 8 p.m., they would be happy to. It's me, I'm the problem. Right? Like I cannot start my day at 8 p.m. because, I'm up working during the rest of the day. But, there are also weekends, that you can take full advantage of. There are libraries that have tons of resources. There are opportunities to outsource where you can have in person or live instructors that your child can log on with virtually. You can perhaps bring in home support where you can have maybe a tutor come to the house to work with your child directly. There are tutoring centers where you can take your child to. There are co-ops that are, maybe a day or two a week where you can drop your child off. There are micro schools where you can drop your child off 5 days a week. So you really just have to think about, what if you could create an ideal homeschool situation for yourself, what would it look like? And then you plug in the resources. But I will say that in recent years, post pandemic, because I think prior to the pandemic, homeschooling looked really different than what it is now. But in recent years, there are so many resources. And one thing about, schools struggling to find educators, a lot of them have come out of schools and have started offering programming and support to homeschool families. So there are still super qualified people out here who can support you and can support your student, but you definitely have to make homeschool fit your life, not your life fit homeschool.
That is great advice. Make homeschool fit your life. And I think that is one of the benefits that people who homeschool, they find that they are able to uh, be more flexible in some ways and maybe do some other creative things with their families that maybe they wouldn't be able to do if
Mhm.
they were tied to a traditional school. So
Mhm.
I love that. And so you mentioned that, reality is that often you do have work or uh, or other obligations. And so there are going to be times when the demand is high and you have a lot going on. And so what are some strategies that you found work to keep you from being overwhelmed and to help you stay on top of everything and manage it?
Yeah, I think that you really have to get creative and recognize that you and your choices are enough, right? You and your choices are enough and they are good enough, and your student is going to make progress. So let me give you some examples. Um, Today is a day where it's 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time where we are right now. I left the house at 8 a.m. this morning. I have somebody that comes to support my children with their educational work on some days of the week. So she came, I left from 8. I've been working from 8 to 7 p.m. My children, the way that I set up my homeschool is that on days where I'm out of the house, that may be the day where I outsource more, right? So that may be the day where my children are logging on with other instructors. The other thing is I have a rising kindergarten student, and so I have to get creative with language arts. So sometimes we do things like, she's starting to recognize some words, but watching cartoons without the volume but the caption on, right? And she's recognizing some literacy, some things. She's like, oh, there's a period or exclamation point. Of course, she's not quite reading and keeping up with the captions, but she is recognizing some of those things. I started a sibling group chat with just Google Chat, and I put her on it. So we laid some ground rules. She must be able to sound out the words, no spamming, use correct capitalization and punctuation, no, IDK for I don't know. Nope, you have to spell the entire word out with proper, use an apostrophe and a period. But creating an environment where the whole family is in, even if they don't know it, right? Because the kids just think it's fun. So she has older siblings that are in the 3rd grade, 6th grade, and then my son, who's also in the group chat. So he's chatting in it from Greece, but she's actually still participating in language arts by talking to her siblings on a group chat. So the more you can start to feel like school is not a textbook, but education is learning throughout your day in creative ways, whether it's a cooking activity or, and I know sometimes there's the whole argument about screen time. Okay, but if you turn the volume off, maybe you'll feel less guilty. If the volume is off and the caption is on, you can actually say this is a part of our instruction. And so there are different ways to just start accepting that life is a teacher and you just have to be intentional. When you're on car rides, sometimes we're listening to audiobooks. There are a lot of great podcasts, history podcasts for children and science podcasts for children. So I have learned that if we didn't get to the science curriculum that week, or even if we did, I will be very intentional about what we're listening to in the car. That's an opportunity to learn. Putting little baskets in the car of learning materials, making sure that there are books in the back of the seats, the little pockets, just being very intentional about different aspects of your life. And I think that really, really, once you achieve a mindset that you can set up your child's life to be a learning environment, you start to feel less pressure about getting through curriculum.
That is excellent. I love that. And what you said about maximizing like your car time and other things. My son learned his times tables listening to some songs to and from different places in the car. So I definitely understand. And I love the group chat, the sibling group chat. That's amazing. I love that a lot. And that actually brings me to another question because I am homeschooling a singleton. So I have one son, but you have multiple children with multiple ages. And so can you talk a little bit about how you're able to manage instruction for the different ages, different levels, and like how you maybe bring them together or separate them? I know that can be a little intimidating for some people.
It can be. And let me be honest with you, because there are some families who I think do a great job. I have seen moms do things like have one schoolroom and they come up with a lesson where multiple ages can participate in whatever the lesson is that even math, they can do math with a preschooler, an algebra student and an upper elementary student all at the same time, and they're multitasking and figuring out how to tier instruction. That is not me. I need one at a time. Okay. So what I tend to do with multiple children is their outsourced classes and their schedules are intentionally made so that I can provide that one-on-one support. Right. So there's not really, I mean, there are some things that we do together where the content doesn't necessarily change based on age. So we might do like some Bible schooling together. We might do some history together. Of course, taking into consideration that the 5-year-old is comprehending at a different level than my middle schooler. But, you know, sometimes if there's something that I think, you know, my 5-year-old might not be ready for, I can kind of talk above her head. Right. And my middle schooler will recognize that, oh, mommy has changed her language so that the little one isn't necessarily picking up on everything. But, you know, so I'm very intentional in that way. But I do try to set up their schedules. All of my children actually have a Google Classroom, and it tells them what they should be doing every day. And so it's not necessarily timed unless it's a class that they need to log into. But it's like you have these 5 things that you need to complete before you're free. And so they can follow along with that. Even my 5-year-old, she has that as well. It just may be that for math, I mean, I'll write the word math, but it may be like a plus sign and a minus sign. We use emojis a lot to facilitate her emerging reading skills. So like for reading or language arts, it's a book and she recognizes that. For social studies, it's a picture of a world. And so, independence is key when you have multiple children. Teaching your children to be independent thinkers. And that's always a big question that I get. How do I get my child to be more independent? And the question I always ask is, well, what do you do when your child asks you a question? And a lot of parents will say, I answer it. Okay, but if you answer it, then you've become the tool and your child is very smart, right? Your child is very, very smart. They are using their resources. Why? I mean, it's just like, you know, now a lot of people don't even think. They just use Chat GPT. I ask Chat GPT. Sometimes I don't think, right? I just go straight to Chat GPT. I used to, before it came out, I had to do a lot more thinking. But, you know, so the way that you teach independence is you teach your child to use their resources. But if you are the resource, your child has come up with an effective strategy. But if they ask you how to spell a word, yet they have an iPad, they can ask Siri how to spell the word. They can ask Alexa how to spell the word. They can ask Google on their Chromebooks how to spell the word. But if they ask mommy and mommy answers the question, then they don't need to be independent with those other resources. So you do have to teach. We do a lot of redirecting over here. Mommy, what time is it? Where did you look? Do you know how many clocks we have in this house? But they, but they won't come. But they know what to do. Now I just have to look. Now I just have to look. They may come in. Mom, what's for dinner? Now, this is not me right now. In the beginning of the school year, we used to have dinner like written on the refrigerator, so you would know. But you can find ways to help your children access that information without it being you. So a lot of times, teaching independence is learning not to be the resource.
Love that. And I will also say, as you're talking about independence, I think that is key for people who may need to work from home while they are homeschooling, because as you described, a lot of times homeschooling is more facilitation rather than always direct instruction. And so the earlier you can get your child to be more self-sufficient or independent, the easier time you will have. I don't want to say it's easy, but it'll definitely help.
Absolutely.
Wow. And let's see, you said something else, but you said so many different things. It's like so many nuggets in there. It was really great. But I love that, how you are able to support each of your students, each of your children at those different levels and facilitate that. Oh, what I wanted to say, I think you touched on something really important, is that if you're a homeschooling parent, it's okay to recognize what you need and how you function, and you're considering your child's needs, but also you. And I will say, from my personal experience, part of the fun is with homeschooling is like looking at the different approaches and different curricula and all of that. And I, over time, because I'm in my 4th year, so still a newbie compared to you. But I've learned, okay, some of the things that I thought might work for me, that actually doesn't really work with how I function. And, or it seemed like a good idea in the beginning, but with the rhythm that we're on, it seems like that's not necessarily the best for us. And I think giving yourself grace and your child grace and figuring out what works best for you is really important.
Yeah.
And then also, oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say the sweet spot, you will reach the sweet spot in homeschooling when you learn to go with the flow. And you've reached the point that you can just go with the flow. If something doesn't go right, you pivot. And I usually tell families that are beginning to homeschool, whatever your plan is, it's not going to work. Right? Because we all come in this, we do all the research, right? We do all the research, but the only way the only way to know if it's going to work is until you try it. And it's okay to make tweaks. And I think for me, that's why sometimes buying curriculum is hard, right? Because sometimes the curriculum may work in the winter just because we're in the house more. But once summer hits, nobody wants to be inside anymore. By May or after, by the end of May, early June, if we're not finished a curriculum, but now we're at the pool more. Or we're starting a new sport. We're starting golf. I just signed the kids up for all of their spring sports. So our day is naturally going to have to end a little bit earlier. So we're making adjustments, in that way. So, but what I do know is that winter will come around again, right? And when winter comes around again, we'll be back in. And the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that we do homeschool year round, but we homeschool year round because we have so much flexibility during the year. So like at the end of this month, my husband and I will be traveling. I'm not making substitute plans, right? They're just, I don't know, I'm not going to, they do have their schedules and they can continue their work without me. Now, are they? I'll have to report back on that. But if they don't, it's okay. It's okay. And so the summertime is usually when we try to wrap up curriculum, but now that many of the other things have sort of settled down, like our homeschool co-ops are done, some of the outschool or the outsourced classes that they take are done. So we actually have more time to maybe, focus on certain subjects in the morning before we go out and enjoy the rest of our summer day. So we don't homeschool year round because I believe in exceptional rigor and it has to be, and this is why we homeschool year round because that's what fits our life. When we go to local beaches, we can take our literature and we can read our books right there on the beach. And, math on the beach is a little bit more fun than math at home. So the kids don't even necessarily mind it. So homeschool has actually just become a way of life. So June isn't any different for me and for the kids than February.
That's awesome. Yes, I can imagine doing literature and math on the beach may be a little more relaxing. That's awesome. But I love how you came back to that point of homeschooling works with your lifestyle. And I think it's important to note that you don't want to get in that trap of comparison. And because certain families, they found their rhythm and it may look more traditional or more like the plan that you had. I love what you said, like your plan's not going to work.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. But I don't even know if the plan is supposed to work. You're supposed, your child dictates what happens in homeschool. And so you have to see how these things work. And you also have to figure out what works for your family. Like, there are certain subjects that what I try to do is I try to link my children up with educators that are passionate about their content area. Right. And so a lot of my homeschool mom friends we kind of joke, but I'm not an outdoor person. But I do believe that camping is a great experience for children. So what that means is, with my practice, we coordinate field trips and outings. You will not see me coordinate a camping trip. Right? Like it will not.
I was actually wondering, I was like, oh, do I need to be on the lookout for a camping trip from you?
No, not from me, but I can tell you, who's doing it and that's their thing. And so I think finding community is very important for parents because you get to kind of lean on parents, who may have a special interest in one particular area. And then parents can lean on you. Language is my thing, whether it's therapy or teaching English language arts. I absolutely love it. And so, sometimes, I have my outdoorsy parents, I have my STEM parents, and then I'm like the language lady. And so, community is very, very important when you homeschool. And I think that sometimes community is not available to people, where they are geographically. Finding online community is really a thing. So we have monthly parent support groups that are online, and we have parents that are participating from all over the country. And until you find your people online, we're your people. We meet once a month. We chit chat and send each other reels and ideas, through social media platforms. And that's how we form those relationships. But being in spaces with like-minded people who share similar goals for their children, it's I don't know what I would do without my village. So I think that's very important for newer families who are starting out.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. The village is very important, especially when you may come from a background where you don't know anybody else who homeschools. And actually, that was me.
Mm-hmm.
When I decided to do this, I don't have family who homeschools.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have friends at that time
Mm-hmm.
who homeschooled. And so finding community was definitely a big thing for me. And I wanted to make sure that my child also had access to other children who learned in that way.
Yeah.
And it's been really great. And I know that you mentioned the online community, but you also described a fairly robust
Mm-hmm.
in-person community. How were you able to find community for as part of your homeschooling village?
So first, well, my story is a little unique. So I have a sister who has six children, and she homeschools them. And then I have a cousin who lives like a few blocks away from my sister, who has three. So between her six, my four, and those, we have 13 homeschool cousins that are geographically close to each other. So that was, it was not hard for me to find people that shared similar experiences. But I can tell you that one of the reasons that we created community was because, as a speech therapist, one of the things that I know is that families sometimes have so many therapy appointments. The kids are in school 30 hours a week, and then after school, it is therapy, 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 therapy. So what I really wanted to do when I started a program that primarily served homeschoolers is I wanted to make sure that those families recognize that therapy and homeschool, if you have a similar mindset, they go very much so hand in hand, right? So in a clinic-based setting, for example, when we're working on following directions, if you think about some of the programs, that my practice offers, whether it's gaming, you have to follow directions, written directions sometimes to maneuver through video games. Golf, you have to follow directions or you're not going to hit the ball. Right?
Right.
Any of the culinary classes that we have, that's sequencing. So it was really an effort to try to show families that therapy and what you do as a homeschooler they don't need to occur in isolation. There's actually a lot of overlap. So being in spaces, where my sister and I are present, we're often able to show families that we can actually target many of the goals that they're working on in therapy in these spaces. And I think that that's important. It helps with generalization. And the community is where neurodivergent kids or kids with physical disabilities, that's where they belong. So we try to make sure that they have the opportunity to be there.
That's excellent. And to build on that, I was wondering if you could speak to parents who may have children with learning differences, and they may be interested in homeschooling, but they may doubt their ability to provide a sufficient education.
Mhm.
But I think we both know that homeschooling can be an amazing option for children who may have differences, learning disabilities. And so, could you speak to maybe some parents who have some concerns about that?
Yeah. So I think that when you have a child that has, unique or additional needs, you just need to make sure that your community includes people that, have a specific skill set or have other experiences. So when I think about the community that we've created, many of the families have shared experiences. And so they are together and they are sharing resources. That's one way to access supports and services for your student. Another option is when you homeschool, you can use your insurance. So the same way that you would get speech therapy in school, now you can use your insurance to get speech therapy out of school. And a lot of clinics love homeschoolers because we're available during the day. So you almost have your pickings for daytime services. A third option, now this is kind of a free option and well, it's not free, but a creative option. Many families, and this is just a little trick that I've discovered, but many families are familiar, or not families, but many people are familiar with ChatGPT. So what I tell families to do when you first start homeschooling, what you might consider doing is uploading a copy of your child's IEP into ChatGPT and ask it, I am going to homeschool this child. Turn this into a home learning plan and tell me the things that I should consider when planning. And ChatGPT will lay it out. Okay. So that's a great place to start, but it will make it very practical for you to be able to implement some of the strategies, and you'll also be able to see what type of support that you need.
That is amazing. I never thought about asking ChatGPT to read the IEP. I love that. Mm-hmm. And so you are a special educator and speech language pathologist, but what about parents who are saying, well, I am not a qualified educator. I didn't go to college for education and I'm not a teacher. Am I still able to do this? Yeah. What do you say to those parents who might feel unsure about their ability to do this?
Absolutely. That's why you and I are here. And you never know who's in your homeschool community. I would say that in our particular area, in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, a lot of the people that are homeschooling are parents that are professionals, right? These are professional parents. Many of them have backgrounds in, well, not many, but some of them have backgrounds in education, but some of them are like engineers. Well, that parent who's an engineer needs to do like a STEM club, or something. Some parents may just have a green thumb. Well, I need that parent to show us because I can't keep anything alive. There may be a parent who's a dentist. Well, that may just be scheduling a field trip and a tour to come to the dentist's office and talk about the things that are there. Some parents are business people. So that's an opportunity for that parent to lead a workshop or maybe a 6-week course about entrepreneurship for kids. So there is somebody for everything, whether it's in your local community or whether it's online. But I think that what's most important is that where you don't feel equipped, you find the resource. You are figuring out what you're good at, and then you plug in the holes. So let me and it could be academics, but there are other parts of life where I think that homeschoolers really get to, learn a lot of life skills. So for example, cooking, that is not my thing. If I would buy a house without a kitchen, that's how bad it is. Okay. Cooking is not my thing, but my daughter absolutely loves to cook. And if I were to get a culinary curriculum or some kind of program, I think that I would take her love and passion out of it. Right. So we found a online instructor. She would send us the list of materials that we need. We would go to the grocery store and get it. And then she would guide my daughter through making the most fabulous dishes right here in our kitchen. So that's kind of when you feel, I don't feel equipped to do everything. Yes, I am an educator. And so, academics, I feel pretty confident, but there are a lot of other things that my children learn that I don't feel the most confident in. And I plug in those gaps with other either homeschool moms, or I find other opportunities in my community.
Excellent. And all right, I'd like to ask, what are some unexpected benefits that you've seen with homeschooling, maybe either in your own family and or with other students that you've worked with?
I think that one unexpected benefit is parents realize how much they can actually teach. It's like one day you look up and you realize that, that reservation that you had initially when you started, your child has learned so much since you took the step to decide to educate them. So that's what I really see with a lot of families. And actually, I consider parents as partners. One of our slogans is we partner with parents, and parents have taught me many things. For example, I'm a speech language pathologist, and I just recently found out that you can use some of the voice output or communication devices to text. That was taught to me by a
Mm.
parent. The parent figured out how to help her daughter text other people using her communication device, right? And so I think parents feel empowered, and I think homeschooling really empowers parents. It empowers the whole family. And homeschooling is not necessarily about teaching your child what to learn, but it's teaching them how to learn. And I think that was a surprising difference for me. My son, by the time he was in high school, if he wanted to learn it, he could research it and figure it out. And I love that for him. And so, when he was when he was headed to study abroad, he didn't have a lot of plans in advance. Right? He kind of was just like, I'll figure it out when I get there. But because of the way that I had been watching him think for the last 4 years of homeschooling, I knew that he would figure it out. Now, it still gave me anxiety, but I knew that he would actually figure it out when he got there, and he did, and he's doing wonderful. So that was definitely a surprising benefit. Did I teach him to plan in advance? Absolutely. But that little boy who was inattentive and hyperactive, now he's just an adult. He's learned to manage it, but some of those little quirks still exist, right? And so it grew with him, but now it's in the form of an adult.
Love that. Okay, so wow, we've talked about so many different things. You shared so many great nuggets. To wrap up, I'm wondering if you could give one piece of advice to a parent who's on the fence about homeschooling, what would it be?
That's such a good one. um, my advice to you would be that homeschooling is not only an option, but it is an option that you can do well. You do not have to homeschool alone. You can call me or Dr. Keena, and we can even try to connect you with resources in your community. But homeschooling is not something that you do alone, that you and your children will be doing in isolation. And if you choose it, you can do it. I wholeheartedly believe that parents are a child's first educator, and there are enough resources and people and tools out here to help you facilitate education at home. So if you're on the fence and you feel led to tip over to the homeschool side, you'll be fine. Give yourself some grace. The first year is supposed to feel crazy. The second year is less crazy. The third year is a little less crazy. And like Dr. Keena said, once you're, it's about 4 years, you start to, you start to get in sort of a flow where you accept that, there has to be some flexibility to this thing. And so I encourage you to take the leap.
Excellent, excellent. So, if people want to find you, to connect with you, and reach out for your services, how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So if you are on Instagram, you can find me at the @ symbol and then S for spectrum, ETC, like etc. So SETC learning. So SETC learning. And if you're on Facebook, you can look us up by spectrum_ETC.
Okay, sorry, let me get that. So that was SETC learning at, oh, let me
It's
see.
at SETC learning on Instagram.
Okay, on Instagram. Let me see if I'm trying to show the banner. Oh goodness. I'll put it in the description.
Okay.
Let's see.
Sounds good. Yeah.
But and did you say you have a website as well?
Yes, I do. So the website, yep, that's it. And the
I was
website
like, I'm gonna get that.
is www.setclearning.com.
That makes sense. All right. Let's hide and we'll get this one to show. All right. Just to make sure people can find you, because I know you offer a lot of great programs. We've taken advantage and participated in some of her excellent programming. And I know that you'll be a wonderful resource to lots of different families.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for the time and sharing your knowledge with everyone. And I hope that this was inspirational and encouraged any parent who might be on the fence about homeschooling. And just go ahead and give it a try, and know that you can tailor it to fit your life. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. And I
Thank
guess we'll end it there.
you.